Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Peter Robinson and this is the Ethereum Engineering Group Meetup. So today we've got Christian who's going to talk about wallets, in particular wallets that aren't like MetaMask, wallets that are a new generation. And so I know you've got an intro in your own slides, but so Christian is doing amazing things in a whole range of areas, including some open source projects. He's this is what, your second or is it your third talk? Anyway, he's done more second talk. Okay. And so yeah, great. I'm looking forward to it. So please, over to you, Christian. You might be on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. I hope you can see my slides. Otherwise, let me know. Yeah, as you said, today we're going to talk about alternatives to the classical browser wallet. In particular, we're going to talk about signers. Yeah, we're going to have the distinction going to make a bit clearer later on between wallet and signer, maybe. Although sometimes the words are used also interchangeably. Yeah, I think this there are really interesting technology that can make a big difference in terms of Dapp UX. Sorry. Yeah, so a few words about me, just really short. As you said, second talk here, also a frequent listener and fan of the show. Yeah, just an open source enthusiast about everything blockchain Ethereum related. I started out as a smart contract developer, then also moved a little bit down the stack, up the stack. And this time, yeah, we're going to be talking about something that's very close to the user experience itself. So yeah, a little bit further up the stack. Yeah, here are my links. You can find me on GitHub or just shoot me a message on Telegram if you have any questions. Today's talk, I have a few slides in between, like for breaks, for discussion and longer questions. But if there are shorter questions where you feel like you're not understanding something, then yeah, do shoot them maybe in the chat, and maybe Peter can keep an eye on it and let me know if there's a question that maybe we should answer straight away. Structure of the talk. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the motivation, what the problem is. Yeah, then we're going to compare what I mean by alternative signers versus account abstraction in general and smart wallets in particular. Then we're going to talk about two kind of technologies that are potential alternatives to browser wallets. The first one being these, what I call remote signer providers or remote wallet providers. We're going to look at three examples in particular, with the main focus being on Web3 auth. And then also we're going to finish off by taking a look at passkeys and the promise they hold for the future of user authentication. So what's the problem right now? Why is the current UX broken? Probably won't have to elaborate on this too much. Try to summarize it here with some pictures. So on the left side, it's a Web2 stock trading app. You click one button, there's a bunch of confetti, and you're done. And then on Web3, I don't know, you click 10 buttons, you have to decode some signature call data, maybe visit 2 other websites to see how your transaction is doing, speed it up, cancel it, and whatnot. So yeah, quite different in terms of UX there. And then also another big topic, I think, is account recovery. So again, Web2, you forgot your password, no problem. Usually you can reset it or recover your account fairly easily. But yeah, in Web3, if you lose your seed phrase, if you lose your hardware wallet and you don't have a backup, you're really kind of out of luck. And so these are two problems, I think, that really hold Web3 back from mainstream adoption. And today we're going to look at ways to fix this. First, just to like kind of hone in on a bit on what we're going to be talking about specifically. So there's this whole topic of account abstraction, which is, I think, a pretty wide set of tools and concepts that try to solve a lot of the complexities, including the ones that I mentioned before. And yeah, this includes the problem of having to pay with gas, so gasless transactions, relayers, smart contract wallets, alternative mempools, like a whole bunch of technologies, I think each of which you could have a whole talk about yourself just on its own. But that's not what this talk is about, or at least not the entirety. Instead, we'll want to talk about alternative signers. And so many of the account abstraction tools, you still need a way to authenticate your user. So even if you have a smart contract wallet, even if you have, I don't know, user intents instead of transactions, alternative mempools, you still need a way to make sure that only the user that is allowed to do a certain action is actually able to do it. And so kind of have a way for the user to prove who they are. And this is usually done using signatures. Yeah, so you usually sign a message. Classically in Ethereum, it's you sign a whole transaction, which has a certain format, but with alternative mempools, maybe you sign something different. But in the end, you usually still need a way to sign a message. And yeah, so we're going to look at technologies that really focus on this signature step in the whole user journey. And yeah, they're alternative in the way that they're not hardware or browser wallets. What is a signature? I think this is like the best, just a really good definition that I found in these two books. So it's used to irrevocably link the sender of a message with the content of the message, which then yeah authenticates the user. So how do signatures work on a very high level? Usually you have a private key and a public key, and a message you want to sign. And the private key you should keep secret. Yeah, with that private key, you can then generate a signature, and then you publish your public key, and anyone with that public key can combine the public key, the message, and the signature to verify that the signature is actually corresponds to this combination of message and public key, and thereby verify that it's really you or the user who signed this message. And so the problem here is, how do you manage this private key, right? That's kind of especially in terms of account recovery. Once someone else gets your private key, he can sign any message on your behalf, which effectively on an Ethereum account means he can take all of your assets. And yeah, if you lose that private key, you also lose access to your account. And so currently, most people solve this problem using a browser or hardware wallet, where the idea is you store that private key in a presumably secure enclave or place that is controlled by the user. So either it's in your browser or in a browser extension, or on a separate device. But yeah, either way, it's fully the responsibility of the user to manage that device. Usually you have a single opportunity to back up your seed phrase maybe on paper. But then, yeah, it's again, you are responsible of storing that piece of paper safely, or that seed phrase. Yeah, if you lose it, it's gone. And another thing that these wallets have in common is that they usually ask the user for confirmation on every transaction or signature. So whenever you sign something, so whenever you use a Dapp which wants to do an action on your behalf, it needs to generate a signature, as we established before, and usually these solutions prompt the user for confirmation every time there's a transaction or signature, which can be, especially for apps where you have a lot of high frequency but maybe lower value interactions, can be quite disruptive to the user flow. And so today, as I mentioned, we're going to look at the two alternatives: remote signers and passkeys. And yeah, let's start with remote signers. Remote signers, I kind of made this word up myself, or I don't know, maybe someone else uses it too. Sometimes they're called embedded wallets, wallet providers. So they have a whole range of terms here. I keep using the word signer just to differentiate it from smart contract wallets, because some providers they provide a whole bunch of solution that includes alternative signers as well as the smart contract wallets. But here we're really just talking about this signer. And they're remote in the way that they manage this private key or generate the signature at least partially outside of the user device. So usually it's some kind of service that is run by a provider, that you have an SDK, and then it does some kind of call to this one or several remote APIs, and can then generate a signature. And so it partially or sometimes completely relieves the user of this burden to manage their own private key. And usually these providers, they have some mechanism to avoid giving one party complete control over your wallet. So there are other providers that are like custodial, in the sense that they kind of have custody over your funds. But these providers that we're talking about today usually try to make it such that they themselves cannot control your account. And we're going to see how they achieve that in different ways, or aim to achieve it. As I said, we're going to talk about 3 examples, mostly about Web3 auth. I'm in no way associated with them, but it's the one that I had the most experience integrating with. And also they have a pretty good documentation where I was able to copy paste a lot of the nice graphics you're going to see. And then we're going to also contrast this briefly with 2 other providers, Privy and Magic. So maybe first, we're gonna take a look at a little demo. So for the first provider, Web3 auth, just to kind of see what this looks like in practice. Can you see the demo app?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there's a link. This is a demo app hosted by them. And here you sign in. You can use your normal wallet, in which case the user experience will be more or less the same as you're used to with MetaMask, but we're going to use one of the other solutions. So in this case, we'll try Google. There's a bunch more here. And so all you do is you do a normal kind of OAuth sign in with Google action. And then you connect it. And you can see that it generates a address here for you. So this is the address that you're now that your new signer is connected to. So basically, it generated a new account for you with based on your Google account. And now we can go here and we can sign any message we want. And then here we get the signature. Also, you can sign transactions, sending transaction. Again, once you have the message, the signature, you can then do pretty much anything you want with it. You can send transactions, sign transactions, send transactions, all kinds of stuff. But I think one thing that becomes immediately clear is that there's no it's just one click. There's no additional confirmation here. And so you could even have, if you implement this in your app, you can even click one click and sign multiple messages, multiple transactions, and thereby kind of provide the user with a very smooth user experience. So that's a very short look at what it looks like when you use it. Now the question, of course, so first, next maybe, also as a developer, how do you use this? Again, this is the one that I had the most experience with. So I used this for a little hackathon project here. And this is really the only kind of, 20 lines of code that I had to use to more or less get the same login and authentication experience that we just saw in the demo. So yeah, you do a little bit of configuration. You do have to sign up with Web3 auth, and then you get a client ID for your app. So I think based on this client ID, it will generate a separate wallet for each app. And then you can choose what chains you want to support. And once you have configured your object, it's really just one or two method calls. And then it returns you a Ethers signer, Ethers.js signer in this case. They have SDKs for other integrations as well. But yeah, then you can just use it as you're used to, the same way as with a MetaMask integration. As we saw, they support a lot of different social login options here. So yeah, very geographically diverse, and also you can manage your wallet with Spotify if that's what you want, which is interesting. And sorry, one more mention. This is basically because of this OAuth standard. So OAuth is a standard of authentication and authorization between different apps. So it's widely used on most websites nowadays. So whenever you see like sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, that's kind of this OpenOAuth standard where the website you're using kind of delegates the authentication to a different service where you might already have an account. And so this is also what is leveraged here and allows you to potentially sign in with any service that supports OAuth. A little bit about the architecture. And this is kind of where it gets interesting and where there are like differences between the different providers. So in Web3 auth, what happens is first the user triggers a login. That's what we saw before. And then this OAuth standard triggers in. So it uses this OAuth to get an ID token from those external login providers. And then this ID token is submitted to their SDK, which then eventually sends it to their auth network. So you have this like network of node operators that are third-party node operators, and the private key is shared between these 9 node operators. and the OAuth ID token is forwarded to this network of node operators. There's auth network. And if 5 out of those 9 providers agree that, okay, this is a valid OAuth token, then they can reconstruct your private key. And so, but what happens is basically they each of those node operators send their private key share to the SDK. And then if you get at least 5 out of the 9, you can use that to reconstruct the private key and then authenticate the user and use that private key to sign messages. And that is kind of what they call the single factor authentication option, which kind of completely relies on this OAuth integration with this auth network. And then if you want to give your user more control about this, you can use what is here in this like Web3 auth core kit wider circle. So in this case, you take this private key that is reconstructed from the auth network, and you use this as just one share, with the other 2 shares being like a backup share and a device share, and then you have another tier of key aggregation and reconstruction with 2 out of 3, and then you use that as the final private key. So this is a bit of a trade-off. I think what we saw in the demo and also what I used before is just this single-factor authentication, which completely relies on OAuth. I think if you're using this extra level, it gives you the advantage that the user potentially can recover their accounts even when the Web3 auth network is down. But it again introduces some of the trade-offs why we kind of want to move away from the browser wallet initially, because it gives a bit more responsibility to the user of managing the device and the backup share. So that's kind of how this works. Here you can see who the 9 different operators are in the auth network. One of them is Web3 auth themselves. So there's really 8 third-party ones. And then here we can see, again, in red, there's 1 or potentially 2 levels of key reconstruction or key aggregation or key sharding. And so the question, of course, it's a bit here you don't really see what happens there. They just kind of use this magic word key reconstruction. And again, this is also used with different terms here. I call it private key sharding. But the idea in this approach is that you take your private key and you kind of split it into 3 parts. And then each share of this private key or each shard is managed by a different party on a different device. And then whenever you want to sign a message, each party sends you the private key share. And then if you have enough shares, which is kind of configurable, then you can reconstruct your private key, and from there on, it is more or less the same flow that we saw before. So here in this example, it shows a 2 out of 3 private key sharding mechanism, where private key C maybe in this case is not available, but you can reconstruct the full private key using the other 2 shares. So this is done using something called Shamir secret sharing. I have a video later, a link later in the talk. It's not actually that complex. Shamir secret sharing, it's quite interesting. This algorithm basically enables this 2 out of 3 or M out of N recovery. From a security perspective, there are maybe 2 things to keep in mind here. One is that you do have to transmit the private key shares somehow. So as we saw earlier, all the private key shares get transmitted over the network to the SDK on the client side where the private key is reconstructed. And of course, this is done with like TLS encryption as is quite common on the web now, but still they do kind of have to leave the device or place wherever they're stored. And then the private key is reconstructed on the user device or in the client software. Again, all of these providers stress how this is done in like a safe iframe or whatever, but still the private key is reconstructed every time. And so if there was some kind of bug that led to this private key somehow leaking or an attacker somehow getting access to this private key, then they would have full control over the account and could have pretty much signed any message they want. And so there's an alternative to this called threshold signatures. And so Web3 auth, they actually offer you, alternatively to the setup that we saw earlier, you can choose to use threshold signatures instead. And they also call this full MPC versus shallow MPC with Shamir secret sharding. And yeah, here the difference in the picture is kind of hard to spot sometimes. So it's mostly like the magic word key reconstruction is replaced with the magic word distributed signature generation. But yeah, that obviously raises the question what that actually means. And with threshold signatures, the mechanism is slightly different. So here, instead of, we still have the different private key shares, but instead of sending the private keys or reconstructing the full private key, each party can just sign a separate kind of like partial signature. So here we have a partial signature A, a partial signature B, and then only those signatures are transmitted. And on the user device, we aggregate those partial signatures into the full signature, which can then be used for a given transaction. And so from a security perspective, this has a bunch of advantages. Again, only signatures get transmitted, and a signature, even if you do, even if a hacker gets access to this signature, there's not really much they can do with that other than kind of doing what the user was intending to do anyway, which he was signing anyway. And also the full private key never gets reconstructed. So only the signatures get aggregated. And you can make it such that this full private key never really existed in the first place. So you can even have the whole private key generation kind of distributed among the different parties so that no one in this process had ever access to the full private key, which makes it more or less theoretically impossible even that this could leak. I think that's why it's widely considered to be more secure than the private key sharding we saw earlier. Sorry. Yeah. So that's a bit of the trade-off here. Web3 auth, from what I saw, was the only provider that had threshold signatures in place. Most of the others were still using the private key sharding. I think it's partially because it's more computationally efficient, and also thresholdizing the Ethereum transaction signatures, which are using a signature scheme called ECDSA, is actually quite difficult. It's a very recent and I think recent problem that is still under research. So, for example, the algorithm that Web3 auth uses was published in 2019. So the algorithm itself, even the theory behind this, is very very new. And so, yeah, maybe you can consider it less battle tested in practice than Shamir secret sharing, which is yeah, been in use quite a bit longer. So that's kind of the first part. I'm going to take a short break here. Maybe if someone has questions, comments, discussions, I said something wrong or anything.
I think there are a lot of questions in the chat, but I think they got answered by the slides. You know, because I think there was a discussion. I mean, and the two of them that I think are not done weren't completely answered. Maybe is where does the key get generated? And I think you didn't really touch on distributed key generation, but maybe that's the answer.
Yeah, so there is, again, for this distributed, like the threshold signature scheme, they usually have in the same algorithm, they also have an algorithm to kind of, for the different parties to generate the private key shares together, also without having to ever have one private key. So it's quite complex, to be honest. I don't fully understand the algorithm either, but there's a way for the parties to generate this in a distributed way. Yeah, for the private key sharding, I'm not entirely sure. For Shamir secret sharing, I think it's usually the case that you first have the full secret and then you split it into several parts. So I'm not sure if there's a way there also for doing this in a decentralized way. But either way, in that setting, you're gonna have to reconstruct the private key at some point anyway. Yeah, that's critical.
Yeah, there's a talk I did about 4 years ago, which is on YouTube on the Meetup channel, which is on decentralized threshold signature schemes, which explains the mathematics of it. So if people want to have a look at the gory mathematics of how this actually works, they can look there. Another question though that was there was, so if I've got my Google, you know, like my Gmail address, and I log in with that, or separately I use GitHub or one of those other many providers, do I end up with a different key depending on which provider I log in with, or is it somehow or other going to know that I'm all the one person?
I think so. We can try this out. So this is like one key. And then, so my hypothesis is yes, but we can try this out. If it works.
Yeah, Facebook changed their APIs regularly, so it tends to break things.
Yeah, so I think I'm just gonna post this in the chat, so you guys can try this out yourself and let me know maybe by the end of the talk if my hypothesis is right. I think yes, it's a separate one for each.
Yeah, that was my guess too, but yeah. All right. Anyway, so back. Are there any other questions? So I know. Yeah, I summarized the questions, but did anyone feel their question wasn't answered?
No, that's a final question, just to be sure. When you're relying on Google Out, you're making Google owner on your cryptos on a certain way because they control. It will be possible if Google is forced, I mean, to seize your keys or give an authority access to your login scheme, could take your funds. Yes.
Yes. If you have this option where you're purely relying on OAuth, in my understanding, if Google goes rogue, or maybe more likely if someone gets access to your Google account,
Yes.
they can use Web3 auth, and they can generate this OAuth token, and they can send it to this network, and then it will look like a valid sign in, I think, from their perspective. So
it's very likely someone can drain you. If someone get your Google account, it's very likely that he can drain your bank account. So it's fair enough, I think.
yeah, that's true. Many people use it as a single point of failure. It is the case, what I said earlier, is that Web3 Auth, they generate a separate account for each app. So I mean, yeah, if on each app you always authenticate with Google, then someone can drain all of these accounts. But still, there's like a separation. So yeah, let's say you use on one app you use Google, and on the other use Facebook, and then only the one where you use Google obviously is at risk. Yeah. All right, great. Yeah, we're gonna have a slide later also about kind of the common drawbacks maybe, or security considerations for these providers. All right, so that was Web3 Auth. Just for comparison, we're also gonna take a look at Privy, which is a competing solution. Privy does a bit more than just authentication. We're going to see that. So they have they have a system where you can connect all of these accounts and build like a rich user identity, and then connect their Twitter and LinkedIn, whatever, and use that to kind of manage that user and get more data on them. So you can use it in that way, but they also have this embedded wallet, which is more or less, I think, more or less the same product as what Web3 Auth does from a user perspective. And so here you can already see that there's like a generated wallet with an address. And here, yeah, we can also sign messages and test that. So yeah, from a login perspective, we saw again, we just logged in with Google Auth. So yeah, very, very similar user experience in general. Also, the architecture is not too different. Here I didn't find a good picture in the documentation, so I had to build this myself. But more or less, it's very similar to the case where you use Web3 Auth with private key sharding, and you use this like full option where you have a user share, device share, recovery share, and an auth share. So the auth share is again this OAuth share, and they have their own backend that integrates with OAuth. Unlike Web3 Auth, I don't think they have this network architecture where they have this auth share again distributed among other third parties, or at least they didn't advertise this. So from what I understand, it's just a Privy run service that controls this share. And then you have a recovery share. I think by default, this is also managed in a separate service run by Privy, although it's encrypted, but also stored remotely, where, yeah, I think they're going to offer other recovery options like email as well. And then the third part is just stored in the user local storage, so browser local storage on the user device. And yeah, whenever the user signs a message, it takes two out of three shares and kind of reconstructs that, and then yeah, uses the same algorithm that we saw earlier for private key sharding. So those are quite similar in Privy and Web3 Auth in that they do this private key sharding and rely on this as a mechanism to balance user control or safety with convenience. And then, yeah, I think I mentioned all of this. Again, using Shamir secret sharing. And then a third solution, we're not going to have a demo for this one, but yeah, Peter had an interesting talk on the immutable wallet, where he goes also in a lot more detail about Magic, which is the provider they integrated with. But generally, their mechanism is a bit different in such that they don't, as far as I understand, they don't do this private key sharding, but instead they store an encrypted private key remotely. So there's just one share, so to speak, one private key. It's encrypted, stored by Magic on their servers. And then the decryption of this private key happens in a separate call to a hardware security module, which is like, I think usually the AWS HSM hosted solution. So basically in this hardware security module, there's a master key that controls all of the encryption and decryption, or mostly decryption. And that is stored, yeah, presumably securely on the AWS services. So that way they avoid Magic itself having direct access to your private key. From the documentation, I wasn't entirely sure about how the authentication works. If there's like, in some parts, it seemed that there was a separate authentication on the Magic backend and then a separate authentication on the AWS HSM. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Peter can give us a bit more details later on this. But yeah, I think it was interesting here because of this like kind of layered encryption approach was a bit different to most of the other providers I looked at. Here, little overview about like the pros and cons. All of them have pretty sizable and well-known integrations running in production. So yeah, all of them seem to be production ready, or at least judged as such by quite reputable companies here. Yeah, one aspect, as I said, Privy has a really a rich user management tool set, so they do more than just the authentication, whereas the other two providers, I think, are mostly just focused on this authentication aspect. Magic is special in that they have a bit of a different security module. And yeah, Web3 Auth, in my opinion, was the one that had the best documentation and also the most configuration. So you could choose if you want to have this like additional key split or not. And they also had this interesting auth network approach for the OAuth share, which I thought was quite interesting. But yeah, this is by no means a complete list. There are many other solutions. So here, like 8 of them. And these are only the ones that kind of focus on the signing authentication aspect. And there are, on top of that, there are other providers that integrate these signers with smart wallets, with relays and all that kind of stuff. So for example, Biconomy, they kind of aggregate or integrate with all of those. So you can, if you use Biconomy, you can then kind of choose one or multiple of these providers under the hood. And yeah, so generally, I think it's a pretty rapidly growing area too. There are a bunch of common trade-offs. We mentioned earlier that in some, if you use OAuth only, you kind of delegate a lot of power to the login provider that you're using to log in. They usually have separate accounts addresses for each step, which kind of has advantages, but also has downsides in that yeah, you have to manage funds across many different accounts if you're using multiple apps. A lot of them, or I don't know, a lot of them, but at least Web3 Auth, they have like domain whitelisting. So when you set up for your on Web3 Auth as a developer, you provide a domain whitelist that from those are apps from which you expect users to log in. And so this makes it a bit less composable, decentralized. So if you have a Dapp and someone else wants to build a front end for your smart contract or your Dapp, or they decide maybe they want to host your front end locally or something like this, they usually won't be able to log in with Web3 auth into the same account because their domain won't be whitelisted. Yeah, some of them rely on remote services run by third parties. So yeah, as I mentioned with Privy, if you have a 2 out of 3 key share split, but 2 shares are kind of stored on Privy servers, then if Privy goes down or yeah, it's not available, then you won't have access to your account. And I mean, one big usability win they do is by not challenging you. Yeah, one thing is there's no additional password challenge every time you use. So for example, once you logged in, they usually keep you logged in. So if you go back to the app, you can immediately use it. And that means if you're like in a public environment, you leave your computer unattended, someone else could just go to your browser, and if you're still logged in, they can do whatever they want, basically. Whereas with MetaMask, usually, usually quite often, every time you open it again, it will ask you for your password again. Yeah, then also there's no additional signature confirmation prompt, right? So this is like one of the big usability wins that we talked about earlier, is that the users don't have to confirm every single signature confirmation signature. And I mean, this could be considered a bit cheating. I mean, this is something that probably MetaMask or hardware wallet providers could implement very easily as well. But they don't do that on purpose because they want to give user maximum control and be able to review every single signature. Whereas here they don't. And that means that once you are logged in, the code of the Dapp you're using has more or less full control over your account. So we press like sign message on the front end, but we don't really know what's happening. Like they could sign a different message, the code. There's no way for us to really review that or assign multiple messages. They won't be able to leak your private key, but they still have pretty much arbitrary control of it as long as you're logged in. Any more questions? Comments? Maybe some drawbacks, problems that I missed?
Eric said, can you elaborate why they can do multiple signatures?
Yeah, so basically, it's just because so once you, I showed earlier the code, how you kind of connect it. You, as a developer, you kind of trigger this pop-up and this login progress. And once the user has logged in, you in your code in the front end, you have this signer, and you can do in your code, you can do any kind of signature that you want with it. There's no additional prompt for the user to confirm anything. So if you're the developer behind the front end, the user clicks a button, it's you define in your code what happens after they click that button. And if with these signers, you can sign anything or multiple signatures. There's no the user never gets shown like, oh, do you really want to sign this? I might be wrong, and there might be a way to configure that on this. That would be really interesting. I think that'd be an interesting feature, so that as a user, maybe you could have rules that for certain transactions you want to be prompted. But right now, I think yeah, there's not the case.
I think that all of these things are trust exercises. Like it's even like when you're in a web to check out, some store online and you click buttons and, you're showed various pieces of information, but you're relying on trust to make sure that, like when you click on that button, this certain action's going to happen. And similarly for Web3, I think it's the same thing, that even for MetaMask, even if it's saying, hey, this is what I'm going to sign, hey, it's just showing you something on a screen.
Mm.
It's trust.
Yeah, that's true. Even if you're using MetaMask, then you are trusting that the developers at MetaMask are diligent and well-intentioned. But yeah, I think the difference here is a bit that anyone can integrate this into their websites, and so there's like maybe a lower threshold. So there's a lot more parties that you have to trust, kind of. So whereas with MetaMask, you're trusting like MetaMask, and you have like this one place of trust. Whereas here, potentially, like every Dapp developer that uses this, you kind of have to trust.
Yeah, yeah, that's true, and I trust the people at MetaMask. I know them, and they're very good. But I know though. I mean, I guess it will depend on the integration, but I know with Immutable, our Passport wallet, so we're letting games integrate our wallet into their game, but I know we've been able to have things to limit what they can do. So I assume, yeah, but as you're saying, it comes down to the people who are doing the integration to make that they've done that and made sure there's no way there can be some pop-up or something over the top or some other attack.
And of course, when you're integrating with them, you can build like your own level of security on top of these providers, right? So for example, you can use them as one signer in a multi-sig, and then you can have another signer maybe controlled by someone else or by your app or by your backend. So you can build your own security model on top of that, that can reduce the trust in that particular provider. And I think that's also, if I understood your previous talk correctly, Peter, a bit what you're doing in your integration.
Yeah, it is. That's how we add a fair bit more security, is by having a second signer. Yeah, trying to have our ease of use with security. Our cake can eat it, but yeah, it's a challenge. So, are there any other questions?
Yes, just a final question about how this is related with the EIP 4337. Some time ago, there's a lot of hype about that, but I'm not sure how much impact really is really having. It's quite complicated architecture with a separated mempool. I don't remember. I read about that a very long time ago. But this kind of solution are somehow related with that.
Yeah, so this is related in the way that I in one of my first slides, I kind of try to emphasize that even these account abstraction tools like ERC 4337 or other smart contract wallets, they usually still require some signature as a user authentication. So you're sending maybe a intent or something to an alternative mempool, so you don't have to pay gas or all that kind of solutions, but you still need a way to make sure that it's actually the user that's authorized to trigger this action who sent the message. And so you still kind of need a signer. And so these signers, you can use them and integrate them with a smart contract wallet with ERC 4337 to do this user authentication. All right. Okay. Good questions. Yeah. So this was all about the remote signers, and now we're going to look at a different solution that's called passkeys. That's, I think, getting a lot of people very excited. What are passkeys? Passkeys are not like a Web3 or invention. They are widely considered the future of authentication everywhere across the web. So I think it's widely assumed that passwords are not the best authentication option anywhere. and passkeys are are replacing passwords, and even two-factor authentication to have a single authentication option that is very safe and user-friendly. And while it doesn't come from Web3 or crypto, it does use cryptography and public-private key pairs. We'll see in a moment how. So because it's using public-private key pairs, it means that any browser or any device that wants to support passkeys or the so-called WebAuthn standard that is based on them needs to provide a way to securely manage these private keys. And that's what really makes them so interesting. So here, for example, you see like an iPhone. So the iPhone now has like a built-in module. I think it's even like an isolated piece of hardware that manages these private keys. And then you can use like Face ID, other biometrics to unlock those the signatures. Also they not just do they provide this secure storage, they often also provide a way to synchronize these private keys using the iCloud keychain or a Google Password Manager. It's all based on this WebAuthn standard. Now, how does this work in, again, this is not necessarily for Web3, but Web 2. So this authentication flow, the user requests a login, and then instead of providing a password, the server that they're trying to log in with will send a challenge, which is, I think, random, but it's like a message that is then sent to the user's device, this like secure enclave or the secure part of the device. And then the device asks the user to authenticate with biometrics something. Once the user does that, the device uses that private key to sign this challenge, and then sends the signature back to the server. And the server will have like the public key for that user, will verify that signature, and then if it matches, the user is logged in. And so this is basically the same thing that we saw earlier with it's the same flow. It's basically public-private key message signing and authentication, which is more or less the same that we were using all the time. And so this means that we basically have a built-in signer in all those phones, in all browsers, everywhere, which is great, right? Problem solved. It's secure, assumably. I mean, if that's not secure, then you really have big problems to worry about, maybe beyond your crypto assets. It's recoverable if you're synchronizing it with a password manager or iCloud keychain. It's user-friendly, arguably. It could be argued that this is the perfect solution, and we're done. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem here in that while they do use ECDSA signature, WebAuthn, it uses a different curve. I'm not going to explain too much what the difference is, but you can see that it's in the name of the curve. It's one letter difference. So it's a rather small difference in the configuration and setup, but it basically means that WebAuthn signatures are not compatible with the normal Ethereum transaction signature scheme. But of course, we have a Turing complete EVM, so we can just, at least on smart contract wallets, we can implement this signature scheme ourselves. So that way, while you can't use it for a native Ethereum signatures, you could use it in a smart contract wallet where you implement this signature verification scheme. But the problem is that it's very, very gas expensive. So here, I took a screenshot from a paper on this, and you can see that for a full WebAuthn authentication, you're using hundreds of thousands of gas, up to 1 million gas. So yeah, you would be spending, I don't know, $100 just to get the user authenticated, and that's before you start having any fun. So that's a bit of a showstopper, at least on layer 1, like Ethereum. However, there's an EIP. I think it's some people call it the most underrated EIP. It's certainly not that much in the news, but it would add this kind of verification algorithm as a pre-compile. And so instead of having to implement it on a smart contract in EVM code, it would basically be implemented natively on the client side. So Geth would implement it in Go, Reth would implement it in Rust, and then it would be available as a single EVM opcode, which would then, according to this EIP, be only 3,450 gas. So now, yeah, this would be very competitive. So this is, yeah, just to leave you, this is still not deployed, obviously, and I think it's not even scheduled yet for any specific fork. But it certainly is getting a lot of people very excited that this could be the future of user authentication on Ethereum. Yeah, that concludes my talk. Again, we're gonna have more questions, discussions on this, and I have a bunch of further resources here you might want to read up on. Some of them include a lot of like moon math, but yeah, it's a really interesting rabbit hole to go down to. So thank you.
You should be thanking us. We need to thank you. That was a great talk. Thank you. Yeah. So we've had the opportunity to ask lots of questions, but are there more questions?
Christian, a question from your personal point of view, between all these horses that are racing in this Web3 login experience, where are you putting more of your bet? What do you think is going to be the final? Where do you think the final solution? Who is going to win this race? You think? Just an opinion, just your personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we do get this EIP 7.2.12 deployed, and you can make passkeys work with smart contract wallets, so this one, I think that it would be hard for me to see like a competitive advantage for these previous providers that they have over like these passkey providers, which are basically natively integrated into the iPhone everywhere. So long term, I think this might be the most promising candidate. However, yeah, we know what the speed is for these kind of hard forks. So this is probably a few years out. Until then, I think, yeah, these remote signer providers are probably already a huge improvement, at least in terms of user experience. Again, depends a bit on what you're doing. I wouldn't put like all of my funds into any of these solutions, but if you are looking at games, for example, if you're looking at other applications where maybe the value that's at stake is not that big, then I think they really are a great option to and can really transform the user experience and enable many applications that are just not feasible if you force your user to use MetaMask. All right, well. Any more questions? If not, I'll hand it over to Peter, maybe.
And to answer a question that was in chat, I'll post a link to the slides in the description on YouTube so that you'll be able to get the PDF of those slides and then get to the links. Yeah. So if you flip to the next slide. Yes. Okay. The merch store is open. Lots of cool t-shirts. Next slide. We've got a whole stack of talks coming up. And in fact, I'm in the middle of even organizing another one after all of these. So with the next one's on oracles from Supra from Supra oracles. And then we've got Diego's going to talk about essentially running a whole Linux stack as a smart contract. And then our own Frank is going to, Dr. Frank is going to be talking about his ideas on using VRS for sequencing. And then we've got a whole stack of other talks as well coming up. So lots of exciting things in the future. And next slide. So there is a YouTube channel. So if you look just for Ethereum Engineering Group on YouTube, you'll find it. There's a Slack workspace. Please join that if you want to continue the discussion. And if you're watching this on YouTube, there is a meetup group. You can join these talks live and ask the tricky questions live. And for some talks, there are examples, and they're on that GitHub